HOA tried to shut down my chicken coop, so I bought the land and turned it into a farm sanctuary. I never thought I'd be the type to fight a homeowners association, let alone become the owner of a farm sanctuary. Life has a funny way of taking unexpected turns. 3 years ago, I moved to Oak Ridge Estates, a suburban neighborhood just outside of Portland, Oregon. After 15 years of apartment living in the city, I finally had my own piece of land, modest as it was. My backyard wasn't huge by any means, but it was mine, and it came with a dream I'd been nurturing since childhood, raising chickens. My grandfather had kept chickens on his small farm in rural Pennsylvania. Some of my fondest memories were of collecting eggs with him at dawn, the morning air crisp and filled with promise. He taught me to respect animals, to understand they were more than just producers of food. They had personalities, quirks, and feelings. When he passed away, I promised myself I'd honor his memory someday. My new home seemed perfect for that dream. The backyard faced a small wooded area that technically belonged to the HOA but wasn't used for anything. The previous owners had planted a privacy hedge along the fence line, creating a secluded space that felt removed from the surrounding houses. I spent weeks researching chicken coops, learning about proper care, and studying the local ordinances. The city allowed up to 6 hens, no roosters, in residential areas as long as certain conditions were met. I designed a beautiful cedar coop with nesting boxes, a spacious run, and even solar-powered lights that would automatically close the door at dusk and open it at dawn. When construction was complete, I drove to a local farm and selected 6 hens, 2 Rhode Island Reds named Ruby and Rose, 2 Barred Rocks named Pepper and Salt, and 2 Buff Orpingtons named Goldie and Sunshine. They were curious, gentle creatures, and watching them explore their new home filled me with a simple joy I hadn't felt since those mornings with my grandfather. For 2 months, everything was perfect. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit on my back porch watching the chickens forage. My neighbors on either side were surprisingly supportive. Maria, a retired teacher to my left, often asked for eggs and would bring over homemade bread in exchange. Tom and his family to my right were fascinated, and their kids would come over to help collect eggs on weekends. Then came the letter from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Notice of violation, it read in bold red letters. Unauthorized livestock on residential property. Removal required within 7 days. I was stunned. I had reviewed the HOA covenant before purchasing and found nothing prohibiting chickens specifically. There were rules about nuisance animals and livestock, but chickens allowed by city ordinance seemed to fall into a gray area. The next morning, I called the HOA office and spoke with Patricia Winters, the association president. Her voice was cold and dismissive. "Mr. Ellis, the board's decision is final. Livestock is not permitted in Oak Ridge Estates." "But they're just 6 hens," I explained. "They're quiet, clean, and the city allows them. They're more pets than livestock." The covenant clearly states, the covenant mentions livestock in agricultural contexts. These are backyard chickens. Permitted by municipal code. There was a pause. "The board has received complaints about odor and noise." This was ridiculous. My coop was immaculate, and hens without a rooster make minimal noise. From whom? My immediate neighbors love the chickens. I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. The decision stands. Remove them within the week or you'll face daily fines. After hanging up, I sat on my back steps watching Goldie dust bathing in a patch of dirt. These chickens had become a part of my daily routine, a connection to my grandfather, a small piece of the natural world in my suburban life. I wasn't going to give them up without a fight. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change not only my life, but the lives of countless animals and people in my community. Sometimes, the smallest conflicts lead to the biggest transformations, and my transformation was about to begin. The day after receiving the violation notice, I began researching HOA law in earnest. I discovered that while HOAs hold significant power, they must follow their own rules and can't selectively enforce covenants. I printed out the entire Oak Ridge Estates covenant, all 78 pages, and spent a night highlighting inconsistencies and vague language. The next morning, I took a day off work and knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood. I learned something interesting. Many residents weren't aware of the strict enforcement tactics the HOA board had been implementing over the past year, since Patricia Winters had become president. Maria, my retired teacher neighbor, shared her own story. They fined me for having bird feeders last spring, said they attracted vermin. I've had those feeders for 12 years. Tom from next door was equally frustrated. They rejected our application to install solar panels, said they weren't aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood design. By the end of the day, I had collected 27 signatures on a petition supporting my right to keep chickens and requesting a review of recent HOA enforcement practices. I also discovered that the annual HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. Perfect timing. That evening, while collecting eggs, I noticed a silver BMW slowly driving past my house. It stopped briefly, and I recognized Patricia Winters in the driver's seat, staring at my property with narrowed eyes. When she saw me watching, she quickly drove away. The next day, a second notice arrived, this one threatening daily fines of $100 until the chickens were removed. Instead of panicking, I emailed the entire HOA board requesting to address them at the upcoming meeting and attached a comprehensive proposal. My chicken coop met all city requirements, maintained appropriate distances from property lines, included waste management procedures, and had the support of adjacent neighbors. I also noted that several other neighborhoods in the area had modified their covenants to specifically allow backyard chickens, in line with the growing urban farming movement. 3 days passed with no response. Then, while checking my mailbox, I met Philip Chen, one of the 5 HOA board members. "I've seen your chicken setup," he said quietly. "It's impressive, very clean." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the unexpected support. "You should know, it's not really about the chickens." He glanced around as if worried about being overheard. "The HOA owns that wooded strip behind your property. Patricia has been pushing to develop it into additional lots. Your chicken coop is visible from there, and she thinks it will lower property values." This revelation changed everything. It wasn't about rules or neighbors complaining. It was about money and development. That weekend, I went to the county records office and pulled the plat maps for our subdivision. The wooded area behind my house was indeed HOA property, but it was designated as a conservation easement in the original development plan, meaning it was supposed to remain undeveloped. Further research revealed that Patricia's husband owned a small construction company that had recently completed work on 2 other HOA properties. The annual meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit with copies of my research, the petition, and photographs of my immaculate chicken coop. The room filled quickly. I recognized most of my neighbors from my door-knocking campaign, and they offered encouraging smiles. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, lips pressed into a thin line as she watched people sign in. When the new business portion of the meeting arrived, I was called to speak. Taking a deep breath, I presented my case calmly and methodically, explaining how my chickens met all city requirements, caused no disturbance, and were supported by neighbors. Furthermore, I concluded, I've discovered that the wooded area behind my property is a designated conservation easement that cannot be developed. Any plans to do so would violate both our founding documents and county regulations. Patricia's face flushed red. "That's completely irrelevant to the matter at hand," she snapped. "Is it?" I asked, maintaining my composure, "because board member Chen informed me that the real issue is visibility of my coop from land you're hoping to develop." The room erupted in murmurs. Philip Chen looked down at his hands but didn't deny it. An older man in the back stood up. "I was on the original development committee 20 years ago. That wooded area is meant to remain untouched as a buffer zone and wildlife corridor." Patricia attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the discussion had already shifted to broader concerns about HOA management and potential conflicts of interest. By the end of the night, the board agreed to form a committee to review the chicken coop regulations and postpone any enforcement actions against me. It was a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. As I drove home, my mind was racing with new possibilities. The idea forming in my mind was ambitious, possibly crazy, but suddenly I couldn't let it go. If the HOA owned that wooded area and was wrongfully planning to develop it, maybe there was another solution, one that would protect both my chickens and the land itself. I needed to find out if that land could be purchased and what it would take to turn it into something the entire community could benefit from. That night, I sat on my back porch listening to the soft clucking of my hens as they settled in for the night. "Don't worry, ladies," I whispered. "We're just getting started." In the weeks following the HOA meeting, a strange calm settled over the neighborhood. The enforcement action against my chicken coop was temporarily suspended pending the review committee's findings. But I knew better than to relax completely. Patricia Winters wasn't the type to give up easily. I used this time to dig deeper into the history and status of the wooded area. What I discovered was fascinating. The 5-acre strip had originally been set aside as a green belt when the development was built in the early 2000s. The developer had received tax incentives for preserving this natural buffer between our neighborhood and the commercial zone beyond. However, when control of the HOA transferred from the developer to the homeowners, the specific conservation language had been significantly weakened in the transition documents. While researching at the county office, I struck up a conversation with Elaine Torres, a land use specialist who became interested in my case. "This happens more often than you'd think," she explained, showing me similar cases. "Conservation easements get forgotten when there's money to be made. But it's not always easy to develop these parcels, especially if there's community opposition. What would it take to protect it permanently?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Well, the simplest way would be for someone to buy it from the HOA and place it in a proper conservation trust. But that would require a majority vote from the HOA membership to approve the sale." The idea that had been forming in my mind suddenly crystallized. What if I could buy that land? But I couldn't do it alone. I'd need resources and knowledge I didn't have. That weekend, I invited Maria and Tom, my supportive neighbors, over for coffee. We sat on my back deck watching the chickens forage while I shared what I'd learned. "The problem is," I concluded, even if I could afford to buy the land, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm an IT specialist, not a land manager." Maria's eyes lit up. "You remember my daughter, Sophia? She has a degree in environmental science and works for the Western Wildlife Federation. She might have some ideas." 2 days later, Sophia joined us for dinner. A passionate conservationist in her early 30s, she immediately understood the potential of the situation. "Actually, this could be perfect timing," she explained. "WWF has been looking for demonstration sites for urban wildlife corridors and small-scale sustainable agriculture. They offer grants for land acquisition if the project meets certain criteria." "Like what?" I asked, trying not to get my hopes up. "Educational components, community involvement, habitat restoration, sustainable food production. Your chicken coop could actually be the beginning of something much bigger." She paused, looking thoughtful. "Would you consider expanding beyond just chickens?" The conversation continued late into the night. By the time everyone left, a plan was forming, ambitious and a little terrifying, but potentially transformative. Over the next month, Sophia and I developed a proposal. We would create the Oak Ridge Urban Farm Sanctuary, a community space that would include 1. The existing wooded area, enhanced with native plants to create habitat for local wildlife. 2. A small demonstration farm with chickens, ducks, and rescued farm animals. 3. Community garden plots for residents. 4. An educational center offering workshops on sustainable urban farming. Partnership opportunities with local schools for environmental education. Sophia helped me apply for a grant from WWF, while I calculated how much of my savings I'd need to invest. I also consulted with a real estate attorney about the process of purchasing HOA common property. The attorney was candid. You'll need a 2/3 majority vote from all HOA members to approve the sale. That's a high bar, and Patricia will fight this every step of the way. I nodded, having expected this. Then we need to make sure the benefits to the community are clear and compelling. We prepared a detailed presentation, complete with architectural renderings of the proposed sanctuary. Sophia's colleagues at WWF helped create professional materials showing how the sanctuary would increase property values while providing unique amenities to residents. Meanwhile, the HOA's Chicken Coop Review Committee had completed their work. Their recommendation, to my surprise, was to create reasonable guidelines for backyard chickens rather than prohibiting them outright. Patricia was livid, but couldn't easily override the committee's findings. Taking advantage of this momentum, I formally presented my proposal to purchase the wooded area at the next HOA board meeting. Patricia's response was immediate and harsh. "This is absurd. That land is a valuable asset for future development that would benefit all homeowners." "Actually," I countered, "developing that land would violate the original conservation intent and potentially create legal issues for the HOA. My proposal offers fair market value while creating something that enhances our community." The board was divided, but agreed to present the proposal to the full HOA membership at a special meeting. For the next 3 weeks, I went door to door again, this time with Sophia and a growing group of supporters, explaining our vision for the sanctuary. We discovered that many residents had moved to the area specifically for its natural setting and were dismayed at the prospect of losing the wooded buffer. Others were excited about the community garden spaces and educational opportunities. The special meeting arrived on a warm Saturday afternoon in June. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. Sophia and I presented the proposal, showing images of what the sanctuary could become. "This isn't just about chickens anymore," I explained. "It's about creating something unique and valuable for Oak Ridge Estates, a place where our children can learn about nature and sustainable living, where we can grow food together, and where we preserve the natural beauty that made many of us choose this neighborhood in the first place." Patricia presented the counter-argument, focusing on potential financial benefits of development and raising concerns about unwanted elements that the sanctuary might attract. The debate was heated, with residents speaking passionately on both sides. Finally, it came time to vote. As the ballots were counted, I stood nervously at the back of the room with Sophia and my growing circle of friends. Whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of my chicken coop, but the future of our community. The HOA secretary stood to announce the results. 118 votes in favor, 52 against. We had achieved the 2/3 majority needed to approve the sale. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Patricia stormed out without a word, but several other board members approached to congratulate us and express interest in the project. As I drove home that evening, I felt a mixture of elation and terror. I had just committed to creating something I had never imagined for myself. What had started as a simple desire to keep a few chickens had evolved into a vision that would require every bit of courage and determination I possessed. But looking at the wooded area that would soon become the Oak Ridge Farm Sanctuary, I knew this was right. Sometimes life's biggest challenges lead to our most important work, and my work was just beginning. 1 year later, I stood at the entrance of the Oak Ridge Farm Sanctuary, marveling at how much had changed. The grand opening celebration was scheduled for the afternoon, and volunteers were putting final touches on decorations throughout the property. The transformation had not been easy. After completing the land purchase, we faced permits, zoning variances, and countless construction challenges. There were moments when I questioned my sanity for taking on such an enormous project while still working my full-time IT job. But we had also experienced incredible support. The Western Wildlife Federation's grant covered much of the land purchase, and local businesses donated materials and services. Most importantly, the community had rallied around the sanctuary in ways I never expected. The 5 acres had been thoughtfully developed while preserving its natural character. Walking paths now wound through the wooded area, where native plants had been added to enhance wildlife habitat. Educational signs identified species and explained their ecological roles. A small bridge crossed the seasonal stream that ran through the property. My original chicken coop had expanded into a proper small farm. Beyond my original 6 hens, we now had a flock of heritage breed chickens, 4 rescued ducks, 2 goats named Mabel and Maple, who had been abandoned at a county fair, and a 3-legged rescue pig named Tripod, who had become the sanctuary's unofficial mascot. The educational center, a modest building constructed primarily with recycled materials, stood near the entrance. Inside were classroom spaces for workshops and a small library of resources on sustainable agriculture, wildlife conservation, and environmental stewardship. Perhaps most popular were the community garden plots, which had been fully claimed within days of becoming available. Now they burst with summer vegetables and flowers, tended by families throughout the neighborhood. Sophia had left her job at WWF to become the sanctuary's first director, bringing professional expertise and boundless enthusiasm to the role. We had also hired a part-time farm manager and an education coordinator who worked with local schools to develop programs for students. As I checked on last-minute preparations, Maria approached with a basket of freshly baked bread for the celebration. "I just saw Patricia," she said with a smile. "She was walking on the trail by the stream." "Really? I'm surprised she came. I think she's been coming regularly, though she tries not to be noticed. Tom's daughter saw her feeding the ducks last week." I smiled at this revelation. While Patricia had resigned from the HOA board shortly after our successful vote, she still lived in the neighborhood. She had never spoken to me directly about the sanctuary, but perhaps she was finding her own connection to this place we had created. By noon, cars lined the streets around the sanctuary as people arrived for the opening celebration. Local officials, including the mayor and county commissioners, came for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. A farm-to-table lunch featured produce from our gardens and eggs from our chickens. Children ran through the educational scavenger hunt we had created, learning about native plants and animal care. Standing at the podium to give my welcome speech, I looked out at the crowd gathered on the lawn, neighbors who had become friends, strangers who had become partners, children excitedly pointing at Tripod the pig as he rooted in his specially designed enclosure. "A year ago," I began, "this was just a forgotten piece of land and a conflict over 6 chickens." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Today, it's a living demonstration of what's possible when we reconnect with nature and with each other." I explained how the sanctuary would operate as a non-profit, with memberships available to all community residents and programs open to the broader public, how it would serve as both a wildlife habitat and a center for learning about sustainable food systems, how it would evolve based on community needs and input. "This isn't my sanctuary," I concluded. "It belongs to all of us, the people, the animals, and the land itself. It's a promise that we can find better ways to live together, to share space, to create something meaningful from conflict." After the speech, as people dispersed to enjoy different areas of the sanctuary, I walked back to where it all began, my original chicken coop, now incorporated into the larger farm area. Ruby and Rose, my first Rhode Island Reds, were still going strong, though they had slowed down their egg production with age. As I scattered some treats for them, I noticed someone standing nearby. It was Patricia Winters, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Congratulations," she said stiffly. "It's quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by her presence. "Would you like to meet the chickens that started it all?" She hesitated, then nodded. I showed her how to hold her hand flat with some feed, and after a moment, Goldie approached cautiously to peck at the offering. A small smile flickered across Patricia's face. "I still think the HOA should have stricter regulations," she said, but without her former conviction. "Perhaps. But sometimes exceptions lead to something better than the rules could have created." She didn't respond, but lingered a moment longer before walking away toward the garden plots. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the volunteers had finished cleaning up, I sat alone on a bench overlooking the sanctuary. Fireflies were beginning to emerge in the twilight, and the chickens were settling into their coop with soft, contented clucking. My grandfather would have loved this place. What began as a simple desire to honor his memory by raising a few chickens had grown into something far beyond anything I could have imagined. A sanctuary not just for animals, but for people. A place of learning, connection, and healing. Sometimes, the greatest journeys begin with the smallest conflicts. My battle with the HOA had led me here, to a purpose bigger than myself, to a community stronger than its rules, to a future built on cooperation rather than confrontation. As darkness fell over the Oak Ridge Farm sanctuary, I made my way home, already thinking about tomorrow's workshops and the new baby goats arriving next week. The chickens that started it all had given me much more than eggs. They had given me a new path, one I would never have found without them. Sometimes you have to fight for your little corner of the world. And sometimes, when you do, that corner expands into something that changes everything.